What happens when a war unfolds in total silence far below the surface where no satellite can see and no radar can reach? And what does it mean when a single unseen vessel can decide the fate of an entire naval engagement in minutes? At 0437 local time, roughly 20 nautical miles south of Sri Lanka, one of the most advanced instruments of modern warfare was already in motion. A Los Angeles-class attack submarine was executing a mission that defines American naval dominance, hunting enemy surface ships in contested waters. Ahead of it, just 7 nautical miles away, moved the Iranian frigate Dana, one of Tehran's few remaining operational surface combatants in the region. The Dana was not an easy target. Its crew was actively scanning the ocean using sonar, sending out sharp acoustic pulses that echoed through the water. The ship moved in a deliberate zigzag pattern at 15 knots, constantly altering its course. Every few minutes, the captain ordered unpredictable turns, resetting any attempt by the submarine to calculate a stable firing solution. It was a calculated defense one that exploited a fundamental limitation of submarine warfare. Submarines rely heavily on passive sonar when hunting. Unlike active sonar, which sends out detectable pings, passive systems simply listen. They provide direction, but not distance. The challenge is similar to hearing a car engine in the distance. You know where it is, but not how far away. To solve this submarine, crews depend on target motion analysis, or TMA, a method that tracks how a target's bearing changes over time to estimate its speed course and range. Inside the submarine, the fire control technician watched a thin green line slowly converge on his display. Each incremental shift in bearing brought the solution closer into focus, but just as clarity emerged, the Dana would change course again, scattering the data and forcing the process to restart. It was a battle of patience and precision, one fought entirely through mathematics and sound. This was no coincidence. The Iranian crew had recently participated in multinational naval exercises refining exactly these anti-submarine tactics. Their training was now being tested under real combat conditions, and for the American submarine trailing them, it meant that every second counted. But the Dana carried more than just evasive maneuvers. On its aft deck sat a powerful asset, an SH-3 Sea King anti-submarine warfare helicopter. Unlike ship-based sonar, which is limited by surface conditions, the helicopter could deploy a dipping sonar directly into the water column. This allowed it to bypass thermal layers that submarines often use as cover. If launched, the helicopter could systematically search the area, effectively collapsing the submarine's hiding space. A skilled crew could sweep vast sections of ocean far faster than any surface vessel. For the submarine below this represented a looming threat, one that could turn concealment into exposure within minutes. 400 feet beneath the surface, the submarine remained hidden within a thermocline, a layer where warm and cold water meet. This boundary bends sound waves, distorting sonar signals and creating acoustic shadows. To the Dana, the ocean appeared empty, but the thermocline was not a perfect shield, it was a fragile advantage. The crew listened intently. No helicopter rotors, no turbine whine, only the ambient noise of the ocean. Merchant ships passed in the distance. Marine life crackled across the seabed. The absence of sound provided temporary reassurance, but no guarantees. Because in this environment, silence was not safety. It was merely the calm before a decision that could change everything. And as the submarine closed the distance, a critical question emerged. How long could invisibility be maintained before the ocean itself turned against them? The Iranian crew understood that survival in modern naval warfare depends not on brute force, but on disruption breaking the enemy's ability to think, calculate, and act with precision. Every movement of the Dana was designed to do exactly that. Her sonar continued to hammer the ocean with active pings, each pulse slicing through the water in expanding rings. At the same time, her ASR-3D radar scanned a full 360-degree arc above the surface, searching for any anomaly. A periscope mast, a fleeting radar return, anything that could betray the presence of a submarine. Below the surface, however, the real battle remained invisible. The submarine's fire control team was locked in a relentless cycle. Each time the Dana altered course, the carefully constructed targeting model collapsed. New bearings had to be collected. New assumptions had to be made. The process began again from zero. It was like trying to track a moving target in complete darkness, while the target itself kept changing direction unpredictably. The Iranian captain's zigzag pattern was not random, it was calculated chaos. By forcing constant adjustments, he ensured that the submarine could never fully stabilize its targeting solution, and time was working in his favor. The longer the engagement dragged on, the higher the probability that anything would expose the submarine. That something sat on the Dana's flight deck. The SH-3 Sea King helicopter was more than just an extension of the ship, it was a force multiplier. Equipped with low-frequency dipping sonar, it could penetrate the very layer that protected the submarine. While the ship's hull-mounted sonar struggled against the thermocline, the helicopter could lower its sensor directly into the submarine's acoustic environment. It changed the geometry of the hunt entirely. Instead of shouting into the ocean and hoping for echoes, the helicopter could listen from within the same layer where the submarine hid. It was the acoustic equivalent of stepping behind a wall to catch someone who thought they were invisible. One competent crew operating efficiently could leapfrog across the search area, methodically eliminating uncertainty. And that possibility weighed heavily on the submarine crew. At 400 feet below the surface, visibility was zero. There were no visual cues, no horizon, only sound. The sonar team strained to detect any sign of rotor blades spinning up, the faint whine of turbines, the sudden burst of noise that would signal liftoff, but the ocean remained filled only with background noise, merchant traffic, distant engines, and the constant crackle of marine life. Still, the absence of sound was not proof of safety, it was only uncertainty. If the helicopter launched while the submarine was still closing distance, the situation would escalate instantly. The crew would face a brutal decision fire immediately without a perfect solution, or dive deeper and abandon the opportunity entirely. There was no middle ground. Hesitation would mean failure. Meanwhile, the thermocline continued to hold for now. The Dana's sonar ping struck the thermal boundary and bent upward, refracting away from the submarine's position. To Iranian operators, the water below appeared empty, a blank space on their acoustic screens. But the thermocline was not a solid barrier. It behaved more like a lens with unpredictable properties. And those properties carried risks. Sound waves traveling through deeper water could bend downward and then arc back toward the surface at specific intervals, forming what are known as convergence zones. In these zones, a sonar signal could travel far beyond its expected range and suddenly reveal contacts that should have remained hidden. For the submarine, this meant that one lucky ping, just one, could expose everything. At the same time, another danger was quietly developing. The thermal layer itself was weakening. Measurements taken by onboard instruments showed a steady change in water temperature. The boundary that had provided concealment for days was thinning hour by hour. 3 separate clocks were now ticking. The first was environmental, the thermocline degrading with each passing hour. The second was geographic, the Dana steadily approaching Sri Lanka's territorial waters, where any attack would become legally impossible. And the third was tactical, the ever-present risk of the helicopter launching and collapsing the submarine's advantage entirely. Each of these pressures alone could end the mission. Together they created a narrowing window, a moment in time that would either define success or erase the opportunity forever. So the question became unavoidable: act now with uncertainty, or wait and risk losing everything. The ocean, once an ally, was beginning to turn into a countdown clock. Beneath the surface, the thermocline that had shielded the submarine for days was no longer stable. Each new measurement confirmed what the sonar chief already feared: the temperature gradient was weakening. The sharp boundary that once bent sonar waves away from the submarine was slowly dissolving, allowing sound to travel more freely between layers. In practical terms, invisibility was fading. Estimates suggested 6 to 8 hours before the layer degraded beyond reliable concealment. But in combat, estimates are luxuries. Conditions could shift faster, especially in a region where ocean currents, weather patterns, and underwater geography constantly interacted in unpredictable ways. At the same time, geography imposed its own limits. The Dana continued moving parallel to the Sri Lankan coastline at a steady 15 knots. At that speed, the frigate would cross into the 12 nautical mile territorial boundary in less than an hour. Once inside, international law would effectively shield it from attack. The submarine could track, observe, and report, but not engage. For the Iranian captain, this boundary represented safety. For the American crew, it was a closing door. And there was every reason to believe the Dana would move toward that sanctuary. In a high-threat environment, hugging the coastline is a logical defensive instinct. If the Iranian crew suspected even the slightest danger, a simple turn north could end the engagement instantly. Time, once a neutral factor, had now become the enemy. But the pressure did not end there. Above the submarine, the Sea King helicopter remained a constant threat. Fully fueled and armed, it sat on the Dana's deck, waiting for a single command. If launched, it could begin sweeping the area within minutes, dropping its sonar transducer through the very thermal layer that was already weakening. The submarine's hiding place would transform into a search zone, one that could be cleared methodically and quickly. And then there was the problem of communication. Deep beneath the ocean, the submarine operated in near total isolation. Standard communication systems could not penetrate the water at depth. Only extremely low frequency signals, ELF, could reach them, and even those carried almost no information. At best, they could deliver a simple instruction: come up and receive orders, which is exactly what had happened. Central Command had issued a signal. The submarine needed authorization to proceed, but to receive it, the crew had to make a dangerous move, one that would expose them at the worst possible moment. They had to rise. Ascending to periscope depth meant leaving the protection of the thermocline and entering a layer where the Dina's sonar was far more effective. It meant extending a communications mast above the surface, creating a detectable radar signature. And it meant doing all of this while an enemy warship actively scanned the surrounding area. One radar sweep at the wrong moment could reveal everything. The risk was enormous, but the crew had a plan. 5 nautical miles to the southeast, a massive South Korean LNG tanker was moving through the shipping corridor. At 200,000 tons, it generated a radar return so large that it dominated every sensor within range. The submarine's navigator had been tracking it carefully, waiting for the perfect alignment. If the submarine surfaced along the exact line of bearing between the tanker and the Dana, its mast could blend into the tanker's radar shadow. Any return detected by Iranian radar would appear as clutter, an artifact of the much larger vessel behind it. It was a tactic rooted in Cold War era deception, but still effective. At 0448, the geometry aligned. The submarine began its ascent. The hull creaked slightly as it passed through the thinning thermocline. Ambient noise increased. The protective acoustic layer peeled away, replaced by the chaotic soundscape of the surface ocean. Moments later, the communications mast broke through the water. For a few critical seconds, the submarine existed in a state of extreme vulnerability: visible, detectable, exposed. Then the signal came through. Authorization confirmed. Within moments, the mast retracted. The submarine slipped back beneath the surface, descending once again into the fading protection of the thermocline. But everything had changed, because now the mission was no longer about tracking. It was about execution. And with every passing minute, the margin for error was shrinking. By 0451, the situation had compressed into a narrow window where every second carried strategic weight. The Dana continued its steady movement, still zigzagging, still actively scanning, but now dangerously close to the invisible line that would place it inside Sri Lanka's territorial waters. Just 8 nautical miles separated the frigate from legal sanctuary. One sudden course change, one instinctive turn toward the coast, and the opportunity would disappear entirely. Inside the submarine, there was no longer any debate. Authorization had been received. The mission had shifted from observation to action. But even with that clarity, one final complication remained, one that had been trailing behind the submarine the entire time: the towed array. Hundreds of feet of sensitive sensor cable streamed behind the vessel, providing its most precise acoustic data. It was the submarine's sharpest ear, capable of detecting subtle changes in the underwater environment. But in combat, that same asset could become a liability. Once a torpedo was launched, any aggressive maneuvering risked tangling or snapping the cable. And if that happened, the submarine would lose its best sensor at the exact moment it needed it most. There was no time to retrieve it. The crew would have to accept the risk. At 0453, the fire control team reached the point they had been fighting toward for nearly an hour. The solution finally stabilized. Bearing, speed, and projected course aligned just enough to create a viable firing window. It was not perfect, but perfection was no longer an option. The weapons officer moved quickly, programming the Mark 48 ADCAP torpedo in Tube 1. Every parameter had to be precise: initial course depth settings, guidance mode. The system was designed for flexibility, but the initial conditions would determine everything that followed. Then came the order. The torpedo tube flooded. Seawater rushed in to equalize pressure, producing a sharp acoustic signature, a transient sound that any trained sonar operator could recognize instantly. In the silent world beneath the ocean, it was one of the loudest things a submarine could do. The crew understood the risk. If the Dana's sonar team detected that sound, the next minute could unfold very differently. But they had no choice. The Mark 48 dropped from the tube. Weighing over 3,500 pounds and powered by a high-energy fuel system, the torpedo accelerated rapidly, driven by a pump jet propulsor that minimized cavitation. Unlike older torpedoes, it left no visible wake on the surface, no telltale trail pointing back to the submarine. Its only signature was acoustic, and even that was masked by the dense noise of one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Behind it, a thin guidance wire unspooled, connecting the weapon back to the submarine. This wire was everything. through it, the fire control technician could steer the torpedo, adjusting its path in real time to compensate for the Dana's maneuvers. It allowed the weapon to remain flexible, adaptive, and precise, but it also imposed a severe limitation. The submarine itself could not maneuver aggressively without risking the connection. Once the torpedo was in the water, the submarine was effectively locked in place. No sudden turns, no rapid dives, no evasive action. It had committed. At transit speed, the torpedo's onboard sonar remained inactive, overwhelmed by its own motion noise. It was effectively blind, relying entirely on guidance from the submarine. The technician monitored the data stream closely, steering the weapon through a crowded maritime environment where a single error could send it into a civilian vessel. 7 nautical miles. The distance began to shrink. Every adjustment mattered. Each change in the Dana's course required a corresponding correction to the torpedo's trajectory. The wire stretched farther thinner, more vulnerable with every second, and all the while the submarine remained motionless, holding its position in a fragile balance between control and exposure. At 5 miles, the Dana shifted course again. The bearing changed. The solution adjusted. The technician responded instantly, recalculating and transmitting new guidance commands through the wire. The torpedo's path bent slightly, maintaining its intercept geometry, but each correction consumed more of the wire's length and reduced the margin for error. Now there was no turning back. The weapon was committed, and somewhere ahead, an Iranian warship continued its routine, unaware that the final phase of the engagement had already begun. The question was no longer whether the torpedo would reach its target. It was whether the target would realize what was coming before it was too late. At 4 nautical miles, the geometry of the battlefield tightened dramatically. The seabed off Sri Lanka dropped sharply into deeper waters, creating a complex 3-dimensional environment that directly affected the torpedo's performance envelope. Too shallow, and the weapon risked broaching the surface. Too deep, and it would lose precious time, giving the Dana a chance to maneuver or even slip closer to territorial safety. Every meter of depth now mattered as much as every degree of bearing. Inside the submarine, the fire control technician maintained constant focus. The guidance wire continued to feed real-time corrections to the Mark 48, steering it through an invisible corridor of constraints, shipping traffic ocean depth and a moving target that refused to behave predictably. At 3 miles, the Dana emitted another active sonar ping. The pulse expanded outward, sweeping through the water like a searchlight in darkness. It passed over the torpedo's path, a moment of potential exposure, but the weapon's size and speed worked in its favor. Any return on the Iranian sonar would likely appear as biologics noise marine life, something insignificant in a sea full of acoustic clutter. Still, the margin was razor thin. At 2 miles, everything changed. The torpedo reduced speed. Flow noise dropped. For the first time since launch, its onboard sonar system activated. A 2-dimensional phased array seeker began scanning the water ahead, emitting high-frequency pings and listening for returns. The weapon was no longer blind. It was hunting, and the target was unmistakable. A 1,500-ton frigate moving at 15 knots generates a significant acoustic signature. Propeller noise, hull turbulence, mechanical vibrations all combined into a clear and trackable profile. The seeker locked onto the Dana almost immediately. Target acquired. From this point forward, the engagement accelerated. The torpedo surged into its terminal phase, increasing speed for the final approach. Its guidance system refined the intercept path, adjusting continuously to maintain a direct line toward the target's most vulnerable point. And then for the first time, the Dana heard it. Somewhere in the ship's sonar room, an operator detected a pattern that every sailor is trained to recognize and fears above all else. Active pinging, consistent bearing, rapidly closing range. This was no passing contact. This was a threat. An alarm was triggered. On the bridge, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Orders were shouted. The captain reacted, but the timeline was unforgiving. 15 seconds. That was all that remained between detection and impact. The Dana was equipped with acoustic decoys, devices designed to mimic the ship's signature and lure incoming torpedoes away, but deploying them required a sequenced detection identification authorization and physical release into the water. Even a well-trained crew needed more time than 15 seconds to execute that process effectively. A hard evasive turn was equally impractical. At 15 knots, a frigate requires significant distance to change course. Hundreds of meters are needed to alter heading in a meaningful way. The Dana simply did not have that space, not in 15 seconds. Its onboard torpedo launchers, capable of reaching targets up to 30 kilometers away, were useless in this moment. They required a bearing on the attacking submarine, a bearing the crew did not have. The attacker remained hidden, deep beneath the thermocline beyond detection. The Dana could hear the threat, but it could not see it. And even if decoys had been deployed in time, a highly unlikely scenario, the submarine still held the advantage. Through the guidance wire, the fire control technician remained connected to the torpedo, ready to override its seeker if necessary. If the weapon became distracted by countermeasures, it could be manually steered back onto the real target. This was the critical advantage of wire-guided systems. Control. Inside the submarine, no one moved, no one spoke. The entire crew remained locked in silence, maintaining course and depth to preserve the integrity of the guidance wire. Any sudden maneuver could break the connection, turning a precision weapon into an autonomous gamble. Everything depended on stability. Everything depended on those final seconds. And as the torpedo closed the last distance, the outcome of the engagement was no longer in doubt. It was already unfolding. The final seconds unfolded with a precision that modern naval warfare has spent decades perfecting. The Mark 48 did not aim for the visible structure of the ship. It did not strike the hull directly. Instead, it executed a far more destructive maneuver, passing beneath the keel of the Dana at exactly the right moment. Using magnetic influence sensors, the torpedo detected the massive steel structure overhead and triggered its warhead at the optimal point below the ship's center line. What followed was not a conventional explosion, it was physics weaponized. A rapidly expanding gas bubble formed beneath the frigate, displacing water with immense force. In a fraction of a second, that bubble lifted the Dana's 1,500-ton structure upward, bending it in a way no ship is designed to endure. The keel, the structural spine, was forced beyond its limits. For a brief moment, the vessel was suspended between opposing forces, upward pressure from below, and gravity pulling it back down. Then the bubble collapsed. The water rushed back in. The ship snapped. The Dana broke apart under stress it could not survive. Its stern dropped. Its bow pitched upward, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky for an instant before gravity reclaimed it. 94 meters of naval engineering folded and disappeared beneath the surface of the Indian Ocean. From detection to destruction, the entire terminal phase had lasted seconds. At 5:08 local time, a distress signal was transmitted, but by the time rescue vessels from Sri Lanka reached the area, there was nothing left to save only debris oil slicks and scattered life rafts drifting across the water. Below the surface, the submarine had already vanished. It descended once more beneath the thermocline, re-entering the acoustic shadow that had concealed it throughout the operation. No periscope, no transmission, no trace. The towed array continued streaming silently behind it as if nothing had happened. The ocean closed over the scene, erasing evidence with indifferent efficiency. But the consequences of this engagement extended far beyond a single destroyed ship. This was a demonstration of modern undersea warfare at its most decisive. A single submarine operating undetected had neutralized a surface combatant despite active defenses, trained crews, and layered countermeasures. It highlighted a reality that naval strategists across NATO, the United States, and allied forces have long understood. Control beneath the surface often determines outcomes above it. For Iran, the loss of the Dana represented more than a tactical setback. It exposed vulnerabilities in surface fleet survivability, even when operating with anti-submarine assets and recent training. It raised urgent questions about the effectiveness of current doctrine in contested waters, especially against adversaries with advanced submarine capabilities. For the United States and its allies, the engagement reinforced the strategic value of undersea dominance. In an era where tensions continue to rise from the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific, the ability to operate invisibly and strike with precision remains a cornerstone of deterrence. Western defense analysts have increasingly emphasized that future naval conflicts may be decided long before surface fleets ever engage. Submarines, drones, and long-range precision weapons are reshaping the battlefield into something less visible but far more lethal. And this incident fits into a broader pattern. As global tensions intensify in 2026 with ongoing friction between major powers and regional conflicts continuing to evolve, the oceans are becoming more contested than ever. Shipping lanes, energy routes, and strategic choke points are now arenas where silent confrontations like this one may occur with little warning. Which raises a critical question. If a single submarine can eliminate a warship in minutes without ever being seen, how vulnerable are the world's surface fleets in the conflicts still to come? And more importantly, are nations truly prepared for a war where the most decisive battles are the ones no one ever witnesses? A US attack submarine silently tracked and destroyed the Iranian frigate Dana in a high-stakes encounter near Sri Lanka, showcasing the lethal precision of modern undersea warfare. Despite the Iranian crew's advanced anti-submarine tactics, including zigzag maneuvers, active sonar, and a ready Sea King helicopter, the submarine exploited thermocline concealment and precise targeting analysis to maintain its advantage. As time pressure mounted from environmental changes, legal boundaries, and tactical risks, the US crew executed a calculated decision to surface briefly for authorization before launching a wire-guided Mark 48 torpedo. The weapon navigated a complex environment, adjusting in real time before entering terminal phase and striking beneath the ship's keel. The resulting gas bubble effect broke the frigate in seconds, leaving no chance for effective countermeasures. This engagement highlights a critical shift in naval warfare. Dominance beneath the surface can decisively shape outcomes above it. For Iran, it exposes vulnerabilities in surface fleet defense. For the United States and its allies, it reinforces the strategic importance of submarine superiority. As global tensions rise in 2026, such silent, unseen battles may increasingly define the future of maritime conflict.